Hello and hi, long time no see, sort of. First of all, thank you guys so much for all the love that I got on my planner setup video. As I'm filming this, I have just hit 2,000 views, which is absolutely insane. Never once considered that it might be as popular as it is, and I'm so grateful for the love you guys have shown me on that video because it was truly something that I had so much fun making and that I loved sharing with you guys. Yeah, I wanted to continue making some journaling videos, and I wanted to kick that off with showing you guys how my December spreads turned out because I kind of teased it in that video. Now they're all finished and I can show you guys what they turned out to be. So if you guys don't remember, I first start with my reading log wherein I just track all of the numbers and logistics and such. Here is my TBR for December. As you can see, I did a lot of checking off. All of my physical TBR got checked off, but I had a digital TBR that I had set and unfortunately didn't get to. I had planned originally to travel for the holidays, and I had a couple of flights that would have been rather long, and thus I would have been able to do some digital reading on my Kindle, but unfortunately I didn't get to that because I didn't go home for the holidays. I preferred to just keep me and my family safe. I didn't get to my digital TBR, but I will hopefully get to it soon, and you will see spreads for most, if not all, of these books in a moment. And then here are my reading tracker pages. So this part up here documents about how many books I read in a day. It was a rough estimate. I would say I read about 100 pages or about 200 pages in a day. It was never really exact, but you can definitely tell at which point I stopped having to worry about classes, which is around this time period. I had a lot more time to read, so as you can see, I started reading a lot more. The audiobook tracker was a lot of fun too. I listened to, I believe, 4 audiobooks last month, so that was really great. And then here is one big spread of all of the books that I read. Unfortunately, I haven't written down any stats in particular, such as average pages per day or average pages per book. I think in the future I will be changing that. So I've actually already changed how I record books a lot, in that I don't give books star ratings anymore. So one of my 2021 resolutions is to not rate books because I felt a lot of pressure last year to read a lot of good books, and by good I felt like that was almost always 4 or 5 stars. And I was just always battling myself with what a 4 versus a 5-star meant. I always felt bad when I would rate things a 3-star or lower. So I've taken that pressure off of myself and declared that December of 2020 is the last month that I give books star ratings. Now, as you might remember, I also started doing some spreads for each of the books that I read in December. It was a ton of fun. I had a load of stickers that I wanted to use, and this was apparently a great outlet for that. Like I mentioned in my planner video, I started out making daily spreads, so just daily check-ins about what I'm reading or how I'm liking my reads. And then I transitioned into doing reviews. I'm going to blur out this page because it's a rant and you guys don't need to see that. That's my personal business. But yeah, I started doing reviews, and so I wanted to talk about some of these books because I read a lot of really good books in the last month of 2020, and I feel like that was like really weird because 2020 was such a weird year. But one nice thing is that I discovered a lot of really great books. So We Set the Dark on Fire was one of the first books I read in December, and I absolutely adored it. A quick disclaimer, there are going to be spoilers on these pages, and I would urge you guys not to read my handwriting. I know it is legible, but don't read what I've written because there are definitely going to be spoilers on the page. I loved the concept of outsmarting the Primera and Segunda system that Danny and Carmen did in the book. I also remember being a really big fan of the sapphic romance in this. I then read The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar. That was a really fun, cute read. I feel like they tackled a lot of topics. My only issue is that they didn't really go as deep as I wanted, but that was okay. Like, it's obviously supposed to be a fun little YA fantasy with a sapphic romance thrown in, so the fact that it maybe only went half as deep as I wanted it to go was like permissible, I guess. The Black Veins took me a second to get into, but once I did, I really enjoyed it. It's absolutely been marketed correctly as a fun found family. Again, it takes a while to get into it, but once you start collecting those family members, boy, does it get real interesting. I remember the main character being particularly annoying, but I think that books are very interesting when you do get frustrated with the main character, because that makes the main character, well developed. When a book stirs that kind of emotion out of you, such as frustration, I think that's powerful. I think, I'd rather read that than a book that doesn't make me feel anything at all. Ah yes, and then I read Each of Us a Desert, and Each of Us a Desert got 2 pages because, you guys, this is one of my favorite books of 2020, if not of all time. I talked about this a lot in a tag video that I did that I will link up in the cards, but it was just such a beautiful, poetic story that I have never read anything like. I can't compare it to anything. I can't really recommend you much based off of this story, but I absolutely fell in love. I can't stop thinking about this book. I'm thinking of rereading this book. It's just absolutely beautiful. I highly recommend it. Again, if you haven't watched that tag video, just a quick overview of the book. It follows a character whose name I still cannot pronounce, but essentially she has to hear all of the bad deeds and awful things and lies that have been told of the villagers that live in her town. And she must regurgitate them to the sun god in order for those villagers to be absolved of their wrongdoings. Unfortunately, that poses a huge burden on her to not only collect all of these stories, but to have to regurgitate it because she begins to lose part of herself. And so this story follows her journey in trying to escape that life, but also a bunch of things happen along the way, and she finds out that her story is more intertwined with everyone else's than she believes. And if that wasn't a beautiful enough synopsis, I don't do it justice at all. The book is just absolutely phenomenal. I could go on about it forever, but I won't, so I will leave it at that. I then did a buddy read with Maury for Legendborn by Tracy Dion, which turned out to be a really fun read. It took me a while to get into it at first because I was reading a physical copy, and it is a little slow at the start introducing the world, but I ended up picking up the audiobook through Libro FM, and I loved it. The audiobook is awesome. I'll just say that this was a really fun dark academia adventure with a Black main character, and then it also just had a really cool adventure with a very inventive magic system, secret society, that kind of thing. So highly recommend it. All of the praise that it's been given is rightfully earned. I then read Early Departures by Jason Reynolds. Fun fact, Jason Reynolds and I have the same birthday. That's pretty much why I decided to pick up Early Departures after Legendborn. I was in the mood for some YA contemporary, but this turned out to kind of be like a YA sci-fi story instead. I don't want to spoil it too much if you don't already know what the book is about. I would honestly tell you to go into the book completely blind. I will tell you that it's a very beautiful story about 2 boys and their friendship, and I don't think that we get a lot of that story these days, where it's just 2 boys who are friends, who are battling through the toughness of life and growing up and that kind of thing. And I just thought it was beautiful in that sense, but also in the ethical questions that it poses, and I won't go into that because that does become spoilers, but I do really recommend Early Departures. And then I read Let Me Hear a Rhyme by Tiffany D. Jackson, which I read both on audiobook and physically, and this was so much fun. Tiffany D. Jackson's works are so phenomenal. I think they make a lot of really great commentary, of course, but also the characters that she creates are phenomenal. So I think, especially in this book, her character relationships really come to life because we follow 2 friends and a sister after a boy is shot dead, and no one really knows why. What they're trying to do in this book is they're trying to memorialize him by releasing his music posthumously, and that poses a lot of issues because a lot of people think he's alive, but he isn't. They want to get his music out because that's their way of saying thank you to him for being in their lives. And it was just such a beautiful story, and it was really interesting. There's a little bit of a murder mystery element, there's romance drama and all that kind of stuff. Also, it takes place in the 90s, so if you're at all familiar with 90s slang and pop culture, I'm sure this will tickle your pickle. It was just all around a really great book, a really fun read. If you listen to the audiobook, the raps are performed and it's awesome. They're great, and yeah, just an overall really fun experience. I then wrapped up the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin by reading The Stone Sky, and it did not let me down at all. I think it was actually perhaps my favorite of the 3 books. I mean, the first book will always stay with me because it shocked me to my core, but the 3rd book blew me out of the water with how it ended and how it brought everything together, because again, as a scientist, there is a lot of scientific basis to what goes on in these books, but I still wasn't able to see where it was going, especially with the introduction of the importance of the moon. I cannot say enough praises for this series, for this book, and for N.K. Jemisin. I then read We Dream of Space by Erin Entrada Kelly, and I read this for the In Cosmic Dreams book club. Again, I absolutely fell in love with this book, mostly because one of the main characters is a young girl named Bird who is very, very STEM oriented. There was a space launch that was supposed to happen. The book follows this family leading up to that launch, and she is very enamored with the launch and space exploration and astronauts and whatnot. And that spoke to me as a kid because I was definitely that kid growing up. I was obsessed with space. I wanted to be an astronaut growing up. Like Bird, I was told very often that was never gonna happen. Not only was I a girl, but I was Filipino. Like, you don't see Filipino women in space. And while that was never said directly to my face, it was definitely the sentiment that I understood when interacting with people who I had the courage to tell about my dreams. And Bird experiences this within the book, and it was a little hard for me to read, but it made me feel so incredibly seen. I'm not the only little girl who went through this, and I know that Bird went on to go and do great things for science. It made me cry a little, but so important for the representation, and it meant a lot to me. I then read Burning Roses by S.L. Huang, which is a novella, and it is essentially kind of like retellings of classic fairy tales, both from Western and Chinese fairy tales, that have kind of been mashed up to make one big story that intertwines all of those stories. Again, I won't say too much on it. I really recommend you read it. I wasn't very familiar with Chinese mythologies and stories and fairy tales before this book, but I ended up learning about it along the way and learning a lot about it more after I'd finished the book, and it was just a wonderful experience, a really great learning experience for me especially. Again, this page is blurred out because it's a rant and it's personal, and you guys don't need to see that negative energy. The next book I read was The Reader by Tracy Chee, and I think I've gone on about this book a little bit, but I do want to say that I really enjoyed it. I really loved it as someone who loves mixed media books, who loves a little bit of extra elements to a book. So the thing I can't shut up about is that there's words at the bottom of the pages, not every single page, but you have to piece together some sentences from the words that are on the bottom of the page, and I thought that was an amazing element to the story. The Reader is another book that I recommend going into with no idea of what's going on in the book, so I will leave it at that. This spread's kind of funny because I hadn't realized that my fountain pen was running out of ink, and then it did, and I didn't have any black refill for this one fountain pen, so I went in with a converter with my brown ink, but it's okay. So this is a spread for I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid, and I was really disappointed with this book. I mean, the twist at the end, it did get me at first. I was like, oh, I didn't see that coming, but also I wasn't like, oh wow, that's next level, like wow, you know, not the greatest thriller ever. I definitely think it's clever, but I don't know if it deserves the praise that it gets in my opinion. And then the next book I read was Emotion of Great Delight by Tahereh Mafi. I got an ARC and I cried for a day after getting the ARC because, as you guys know, A Very Large Expanse of Sea, which is Tahereh Mafi's first YA contemporary, that book made me cry literally the entire time I was reading it. So I was so ready for an Emotion of Great Delight, and I was absolutely not let down at all. I didn't cry per se on this book. I definitely felt a lot of emotion, but it was a lot darker of a read. I think that A Very Large Expanse of Sea allows you to feel some joy when Shierin gets to breakdance with her brother and his friends, or when she falls in love with Ocean James. But in Emotion of Great Delight, I don't think there's that same level of joy that you're able to find. It's definitely a lot harder of a book, but I think it's still just as beautiful and showcases how well Tahereh Mafi is able to make situations that we might not be able to experience as Muslim Iranian Americans, but still force us to empathize and understand the situation. So yeah, I'm super excited for this to come out. I cried for a day after getting the arc because I was so excited. I then read The Braiding God by R.F. Kuang. I won't go into this too much. I will just link up in the cards the video of me doing this spread because I did it live on camera. Great book, great series. R.F. Kuang owes me some therapy sessions. I then read Everlasting Nora by Marie Miranda Cruz because it was one of the books that I really wanted to get to before the end of the year, and I was really close to reading 200 books, and there were some short contemporary books that I could get through rather quickly, so I decided to pick up this one, and it was a beautiful read. I mean, I've never read anything like it. It follows Nora as she and her mom live in a graveyard, and her mom gets into some trouble, and she has to enlist the help of her neighbors in order to help find her mom and help continue living life as comfortably as she can. A very heartbreaking story, but it's very realistic, and I think that a lot of people should read this just to know what's going on. The Philippines isn't the only place where these kinds of cities exist, so if you didn't know that they exist, I think you're definitely behind on the times, and you need to not only expose yourself to some information about those cities, but you need to read a book like Everlasting Nora to understand what life is like and why people might be there. I then read Vanessa Yu's Magical Paris Tea Shop by Roselle Lim, which was such a fun and wonderful read. I absolutely adore Roselle Lim's writing. I cannot stop gushing about how magical and beautiful this book was. I mean, from the concept of Vanessa being able to see people's futures in the bottoms of their teacups, that concept is just so much fun. But being transported to Paris and having her go on this adventure to find love and understand her powers and connect back with her family, I think there was just so much good things that intertwined so well, alongside the beautiful descriptions of Paris and the adventures that she has around that city. I then read A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy in audiobook form, and unfortunately I think that once again audiobooks kind of ruined my experience. So A River of Royal Blood follows Eva as she is coming up on her birthday, and on her birthday she and her sister must fight to the death to see who will become queen, and that poses particular issues because she and her sister both have magical powers, but her sister has a really good grip on her powers, whereas she has no idea how to use hers. We follow her in the days coming up to her birthday in which she will have to fight her sister, and I think again the audiobook really made this fall short for me. The adventure that happened just felt a little too long. I'm looking forward to reading the sequel, which I believe comes out this year, because that will actually follow the aftermath of the events at the very end of the book, and I think that has a lot of potential for a really great sequel. And the last book that I read, my 201st read of 2020, was After the Shot Drops by Randy Rabai. There is a great friendship between two young boys who are, just trying to figure out what they're doing and trying to get through the trials and tribulations of basketball. I'm making a joke, but honestly this book was really nice, and it does talk about issues that are bigger than high school basketball. And the most important takeaway is the friendship that is on display in this book, and how I don't think I read enough of that, and so I was really grateful to have read 2 books this month that had 2 young male friendships. And that was it for December. I then just did a simple little Hello 2021 spread and started on my reading drill for 2021. And you guys will see that when I wrap up January. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing all of my spreads from December and seeing how I set up my new Traveler's Notebook to be my reading journal. Thank you guys so much again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.